Okay, so welcome to this part of the lecture on the history of virtual reality and augmented reality. So I'm going to take you back in time to give you some context for the history of the development of this technology, why it's taken so long, despite having VR being a thing in the 60s, the 90s, the 2000s, and even now, not having been taken up as widely as many people would expect. So last year, during the lecture, I put out this poll, and I'm suspecting that the results to this haven't really changed very much. I asked, what experience do you have with virtual reality? And this was the cohort of students in RN6904, Mobile Media and Games, many of which are doing master's degrees in interaction design and digital communication and culture. And really finding in that as many as 30% of the people had never even used VR before. Another 30% had only watched videos, hadn't interacted. And only 2% of the people who responded to this, of the 100 people that responded to this survey, actually owned a VR headset. So thinking about VR as this technology that is going to be incredibly transformative, but at the same time is kind of not there yet. I think this historical perspective that I'm going to give you is going to help you kind of understand maybe why that is. But to do that, we're going to have to go back in time, as far back as the 1950s, to a problem that was in dire need of a solution. The complexity of the machines that we had started making to use and for war, but also for everyday purposes and in factories, had gotten to the point where these machines were so complex and so high stakes that if you made a mistake, you could die, that we needed some way of being able to train people. And this was the problem. This is what the cockpit of an F-86A Sabre looked like in 1950. So many dials, so many different things that you had to keep track of. And so this is a problem. We can't have all of our pilots dying while training in this multi-million-dollar plane. This is the problem, and a problem that was in need of a solution. So the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency gave funding to a guy called Ivan Sutherland. Now, Ivan Sutherland is a huge deal in computer graphics. He was the first person to invent Sketchpad, the first drawing program, which was the first interactive computer program. And what he was working on in the 1960s was how computers could draw three-dimensional objects, go away from being just text and numbers and start representing the 3D world in digital form. And so Ivan Sutherland developed something that became known as the ultimate display. So the ultimate display was a head-worn pair of glasses that showed you the world around you, but overlaid over that a three-dimensional object. And the idea behind this three-dimensional display was to present the user with a perspective of an image that changes when you move. So instead of it just being an object in front of your eyes, it is an object that appears to be in the physical environment that you can walk around and look at from different angles. Now, the problem with a device like this is that the computer necessary to run the ultimate display was likely the size of a lecture theatre. And it was also another nickname for this device was the Sword of Damocles, because of the apparatus that was held above the user's head when they were viewing it. But this display in the 1960s has all of the core features of what we might consider virtual or augmented reality. You were able to look up and down, left and right. You had 6 degrees of freedom, and you could move around a virtual object. But it clearly was a technology that wasn't there yet. Now, but the problem remained. How do we put people in virtual situations so they can train in them in a way that is as close to being real as possible? And so NASA took up this question in the 1980s with their Virtual Environment Workstation, developed in the 1980s at NASA, hoping to solve the same training and simulation problems, but also the idea of telepresence. What NASA really wanted to be able to do was put an astronaut in the space station in a training scenario that had been uploaded to space without having to have the costly apparatus of being able to predict what you might need to train an astronaut while they're in space to do. And here's what it looked like. So we can see that while this is nothing in comparison to the virtual reality that we have today, it's leaps and bounds above what Ivan Sutherland had invented. And what I think was really interesting about NASA's work in virtual reality is that it showed how important it was that we become embodied in that virtual environment. It's not just about a display, but an interface that allows us to feel like we are in this virtual world. And in the 1990s, Silverman wrote about this VR. Looking at it today evokes a reaction similar to what early television must have had. Exciting, but not quite there. Full of potential, but full of still of frustration when the system breaks down, doesn't track perfectly, and reminds us constantly that we are not in a real environment. And this question of being embodied in a virtual environment was also taken up by game companies like Nintendo, with their product, the Nintendo Power Glove, which was an interface that you wore on your hand that had sensors on the top of the hand in this part here that allowed you to read the visuals that were on the screen, and the person would play and hold their arm out and be able to interact with that virtual world. Although their display wasn't being, what they could see wasn't in a 3D virtual environment, they were still playing on a television. The controller was this 3D hand that allowed them to interact, to shoot and control objects. But what I want you to do if you're watching this at home, and if we were in the lecture theatre I would have made you do this for me, is I want you to put your hand out in front of you. And I want you to hold that hand out for as long as you can. And I've done this in the lecture theatre and most people can do it for a minute. Some people can do it for 2 minutes. But not very many people can do it for 3 minutes. And so this is a computer game interface predicated on trying to get me to do something that is just physically impossible, which is hold my hand out. And I want you to remember this example, because what it does is it shows us how important the body becomes when we're designing these natural and embodied interfaces that require an intimacy with our body to be immersive and to be realistic, but then fail if they don't take into account what it is the body can actually do. And I'm going to put my arm down now because it's hurting. And this trailer for the Nintendo Power Glove really shows you what they're trying to go for.
The Power Glove for your NES. Now you and the games are one. The Power Glove. Everything else is child's play.
But this tagline of "You and games are one" is the same underlying idea that still motivates our desire for virtual reality today, is we want that interface between us and the virtual world to dissolve. Now, the next big thing in virtual reality was the Sega Virtua VR, a device that was announced at the 1993 Consumer Electronics Show and then set out for testing. The tagline was "out of the laboratory and into your living room." And this was a huge advance in the technology that was available. Instead of it costing hundreds of dollars to be able to locate a headset in a room, people had worked out a way to do that for 50 cents. In fact, the patent holder for that is Mark Pesce, who's an honorary research fellow at the University of Sydney in the Department of Media and Communications. And this was the Sega Virtua VR.
And suddenly, I'm deep in a future world of fast-paced action. You're totally immersed in another world. It's like being there. You're in control of the universe. It's like you've got a movie living in your head. You've got surround sound, the works. It's everywhere you turn. The game completely surrounds you. You move, it moves all around you. Incredible! What started with rocket scientists now goes where no VR has gone before.
But this device was never successfully launched, and after some testing was quickly scrapped by Sega in what their lawyers said could be one of the biggest consumer class actions of all time.
In focus this evening, those so-called virtual reality games. When they were first unveiled, the science of it all was staggering, but now there's some evidence it's having a staggering effect, literally, on some who use it when they try to return to the real world. Our report from NBC's Kerry Sanders.
When we try to replicate the real world and trick our body, which is what is key for virtual reality, and we get it wrong, motion sickness is the result. It's what's called proprioception conflict. What our eyes are seeing, but then what our muscles and our vestibular systems, such as our inner ear, are feeling. If they vary, such as when you're feeling dizzy, your eyes are telling you that you're staying still, but your inner ear is telling you that you're swaying. If they vary, maybe you've been poisoned. Biologically, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution have told us that that could be true. And the best thing to do in those circumstances is to vomit. Vomit up that poison. And that's one of the reasons why virtual reality really struggles with motion sickness. Because it's a medium that demands a close integration with our body. But if you get that just a little bit wrong, you're going to start feeling sick. And so virtual reality basically died in 1994. No new devices for 20 years. And it's what a lot of VR scholars call the winter of VR, VR's long winter. The technology needed to catch up. It just wasn't there yet. We weren't going to be able to replicate the physical environment in a digital display accurately enough for people to use. Now, there were still a few virtual reality headsets being made and used in studies, but often these could cost hundreds, if not millions of dollars to develop and operate. But during this time, something else was happening, which was that video games and later the smartphone were causing digital technologies to accelerate in their ability and their compactness. We went from having Lara Croft as being this incredibly pixelated thing on the PlayStation 1 to Lara Croft in the latest reboot, who is graphically extremely realistic. And the advances in technological computing that were necessary for this transition were also the advances that we needed for virtual reality. And then in 2014, at a Google keynote, two Google engineers got up and they showed us a Google Cardboard.
So while Boris is assembling the viewer, let me emphasize why we actually chose cardboard and we actually stick to it. The first reason is we wanted the viewer to feel and look really simple. You know, everybody is familiar with cardboard, and the idea there is that your phone is really the piece that does the magic here. Your phones are so powerful. It was just great to have this simple viewer on top of it. The second reason is we want you guys to just take scissors, staplers, and just go crazy at it, modify it. And it's just so natural and easy with cardboard. We put the plans online. If you go to our main website, and it's open for grab, just go crazy at it. And send us your modifications. We'll be really happy to see them. So Boris is a bit slower than the rehearsal, yeah. OK, great job, Boris.
And so what has happened over that long winter, over that 20 years, is the computing power that was needed to power Ivan Sutherland's Ultimate Display, which, if you remember, would fill an entire lecture theatre, or that was beyond the reach of an organisation like NASA, had continued to advance and was suddenly all contained in a mobile phone. And the Google Cardboard is just that, cardboard, that holds your phone on your face, and with some plastic display allows you to turn your phone into a more powerful virtual reality headset than any of the others that I've shown you in this lecture so far. Now, Samsung released the Gear VR, which is essentially the exact same thing, but it's just a plastic version of the Google Cardboard display. And the New York Times sent one of these Google Cardboards out to every single one of its 2 million subscribers. And so we go from a period of having no new virtual reality headsets to suddenly the market is flooded with them. Google Cardboard, Samsung Gear VR, the Oculus Rift, which is now the biggest virtual reality headset, and the PlayStation, which released a virtual reality headset that you could play with the PlayStation 4 and is no doubt going to be a big part of the next generation of console gaming. But also we see devices like the Oculus Go and the Oculus Quest, mobile headsets that don't even need a computer to run them, that can do some pretty amazing things, as you're going to see in the over this week and next week. And so we've gone from having very few headsets out there to a year-on growth that really shows the popularity of the PlayStation, but also Oculus and its moves to making VR as accessible as possible with the Oculus Go and Oculus Quest headsets. Something that is growing substantially. This is the number of headsets connected to Steam, which is a really popular gaming digital distribution platform, which we similarly see is growing well beyond 1 million, but that growth is outpacing itself to the point now where we've got a company like Facebook, who is, I think, tomorrow, so I'm recording this lecture before the latest Facebook VR announcements, bringing VR to the masses. Now, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg see VR as the future of how we connect with other people in the world. And I think a time like this has really shown us the importance of video conferencing. And I'm wondering, where is this going to take us with virtual reality? But Facebook have been advertising a in development project called Facebook Horizons, which is a virtual reality social world. But we also must wonder about some of the negative possibilities of this, looking at what Facebook has done with its algorithmic recommendation systems, targeted political advertisements, and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But that brings us to where we are today. A moment fraught with possibilities and concerns, but also the opportunity of a technology that really does feel like it's almost there, but we still don't quite have the apps for it. And that's what your assignment is going to be for this part of the course, is pitching to an organization. It could be a company, a government department, a charity, a museum, or the university, an idea for how they might use virtual reality. And you're going to demonstrate to us that you understand the potential for virtual reality or augmented reality, what it can do, but also what its current limitations are. So thanks for watching this lecture on the history of virtual and augmented reality. Don't forget to check out the other lectures. I make quite a few rather than just having some block ones. And looking forward to hearing what you think about VR and AR in the tutorials. See you later.